see something I will learn. I need to see something I will learn.
Like an apple pot from the hands of a great worker, they returns to play. The rise in the land of the living, of the Kubi, BANTU production.
Toto wa Kibatu, Mana Muntu. Mana Muntu.
Greetings. I cannot hear you, unfortunately. Do you have a mic like this? Because seemingly your microphone of your computer is not working. Maybe because of the surge, you have a technical problem. I don't know what to say, but I cannot hear you. So there's a communication issue that doesn't seem to be resolved. But do you hear me? Yes, but I don't hear you. So I don't know what to do. Maybe you want to have me just speak a little bit about who I am and what I do. Without having to ask me questions. Maybe that's what the ancestor wants, because I cannot hear you and I don't want to take much time just trying to figure out. All right, so I'm going to reintroduce myself, and then I'm going to speak a little bit about what I do and what's relevant in what I do. So I am Queen Diambi, so I greet you all. Jambo, Aksanti sana. And Abarikani is a bit the Swahili I know, but I am from Congo, and my language is Lingala and Chiluba. So I do not speak Swahili yet, but I believe it's the language to study, because one day, very soon, I hope that Africa will use Swahili as the international African language, not only on the continent, but also in the diaspora. And it's one of the things that I'm advocating for, that we start to educate our children in a second language that is Swahili, for an international African language. So my name is Queen Diambi, Kabatusila Mwata, Mukalenga Mukaji wa Nkashama, wa Bakwa Luntu, wa Baluba, wa Kasaï wa Congo. So Queen Diambi is my name. It means the bearer of good news. So a lot of the things that I do in the world are to seek for good news so I can spread them or create them with my work. So this is my name. Kabatusila is my father's name. It means be aware of your surroundings, so to be prudent and to always be aware of what's going on around you, so that you can proceed with caution. Tsyiyoyo Mwata is the name of my great-grandfather, whose lineage gives me the ability to sit on the throne of my people today, the Benachiamba, and then, crowned as the queen of the, or woman king, I should say. Mukalenga Mukaji means woman king, of the order of the leopard of the Bakwa Luntu people. And I also hold other titles. I am Grande Mãe do Povo Bantu Brasileiro, that is great mother, queen mother of the Bantu of Brazil. So there are approximately 100 million African descendants in Brazil. And they are working very hard to preserve the heritage and to also connect with the continent, with their family on the continent. And I'm also Reina de los Congo de Panama. So I'm also a queen of the Congo historical descendants who are in Panama. And I was crowned in 2022 in May. And I basically work to, you reunite the African diaspora, mainly the historical diaspora, to the continent and to their family in the continent, but not only just to reconnect, but also to reconnect with self as an African individual, to work on restoring a sane identity of what it is to be an African today, an identity that is very diverse, of course, because all the Africans on the continent are not the same, and certainly not the African in the diaspora. Many of them have, of course, different expressions depending on where they are, depending on what culture they were under the influence of. If it's the United States, it's more like a British culture. If it's Brazil, it's Portuguese. And if it's Colombia, for instance, it is Spanish. And also if it's the French Guyana or some of the Caribbean islands, might be under French influence. So they developed, of course, different cultures, but we have common denominator. It's a lot to do with the value that we have inherited from our ancestral, cultures that were in Africa for thousands of years. So working on restoring this identity is quite important to me. And I think it's one of my most important tasks and role to play as a cultural ambassador to demonstrate that we can live in a contemporary age, but use and uphold, values, that ancestors' values of our traditions, and that were at the core of the creation of many African civilizations that were flourishing for a couple of thousands of years, and certainly hundreds of years from the couple of centuries we've passed. So being a traditional queen today, of course, I'm no longer a governor of my people. I don't, govern my own land, because it's now under the umbrella of what I call secular government, that were created under the boundaries of ex-colonial states, because the Africa, of course, that we know today is an Africa that was created in 1885 at the Berlin Conference. Before that, Africa was, of course, populated with many of diverse cultures, but we had a common denominator. Most of the people populating Africa are Bantu, are people from the north, under Sahel region, all the way to South Africa, including West and East Africa, and of course Central Africa. So most of the population there are considered to be Bantu descendants. And of course we have other type of ethnic groups, but we have a lot of the common understanding of reality, and also common history to share in terms of the experience with the human trafficking that took place for several centuries, 8 centuries, for the Arab trade, human trafficking, that, where they came and captured many Africans to bring them to the region that we consider today to Middle East and Persia, and to do work and build many of the countries or the cities we know today, and ancient cities that are no longer. And then further down the history, we had then the European human trafficking period that many refer to as slave trade. I don't, because I don't think it was a trade. A trade is usually something that is made to be fair for both sides of the equation, trading, and also with an equal rapport of force. But in our case, it was not. These prerequisites for me to call anything a trade were not are not relevant. So therefore, it is indeed a great mahafa, or the great catastrophe of this period that really destabilized and destructured many of our kingdoms. Many of our civilizations were destroyed because of this handover. Of course, it's not a recent story. Excuse me, because already from the from 1000, about 1200 before Common Era, the Kemetic Empire started to fall because the Hittite and the Assyrians and the Persians successively invaded Kemet and really destroyed a lot of the civilization that was there for quite some time, probably about 5,000 to 6,000 of years, even more, because now they are redating the Sphinx and believing that he might even be 10,000 years of old. So when the civilization of Kemet fell, that was a really big center for our civilizations of Africa. It was like a paramount of the African civilization. It started the decay of the African dominance over the historical narrative. So after the Assyrian came, the Persian came. After the Persian, 300 before Common Era, the Greeks came and destroyed some more, and actually got a lot of their knowledge from what they got in Kemet. They studied for extensively in the centers, the wisdom centers, and the universities of the time, acquired enormous knowledge in every single field, including mathematics, including all sciences, astronomy, chemistry, medicine, biology, and every other field of science, including more fields like architecture, because before the Greeks came to Kemet, there was no such thing as a Greek architecture, a Greek column, or any of that. Based on the work of the Greek, or the words of the Greeks themselves, they give reference, pay homage and reference to all the knowledge they acquired from Africa. But the Kemetic civilization, that is one of the most known African civilization, although it took decades before it was recognized as a Negroid African civilization, even if in front of the UNESCO, our elder and sage Sheikh Anta Diop and Teofilo Benga demonstrated massively that the proofs were overwhelming, to provide information about the fact that this civilization was indeed a Negroid civilization that took her base in Central Africa, mainly Sudan and below. So, but the Great Lake region was at the source of that civilization. So, although we know the truth, but the narrative is still not following, the information that is the accurate information. So, of course, we understand that because Africa has been victim of a massive attack for a couple of centuries of exploitation of her people to start, and now her resources to continue, a huge propaganda machine was put in place to ensure that the Western nations and the Arab nation could deal with the cognitive dissonance of mistreating other human beings. So disqualifying them of human rights, they could only do it because they basically took away their status as humans. And with that, they had to delete and erase and do a huge operation of omerta on African history. And it's not like the people who came to Africa, even in the 14, 15, 16, 17 centuries, did not know what was going on in Africa, did not know that we had advanced civilization, even many times more advanced than the civilizations in Europe, because after the collapse of the Roman Empire, Europe was in the Dark Ages for a few centuries, while Africa was flourishing with many very amazing kingdoms, very well organized societies, and international commerce routes where they were trading with even China. So what we have witnessed, once they started to pursue their own development using the labor of African people, it was necessary to destroy the image of the African people and to make of an African a slave. An African was never born a slave, was never a slave. And we have to now do a lot of work to debunk the history that they told us, because most of our history that we know has been told to us by those same people who came to colonize, who came to exploit, who came to plunder, who came to abuse. So we cannot continue to give credit to information to those who have, had a vested interest in portraying us as if we were not worth being treated as human, and if we didn't deserve the respect and the consideration that any human person would deserve. So we are now in a phase for the past couple of decades where some of our elders and scientists and African intelligentsia, I'm making a difference between African intelligentsia and African intellectuals. There's a big difference. African intellectuals are mainly the people who have been educated within the framework of the colonial system of education, where all the value upheld are the same values as the values that made it so that we were subjugated and we were deprived of our liberties and sovereignties. And those education, mostly what I would call training program, and which may contain a lot of very interesting information and very, high science and technology, and a lot of the theories that were developed in the Western world. And so I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but I'm just saying for an African person, that is not education, that is training. So after the training, it's okay to be trained, but unless that training teaches you to hate yourself, to have very low consideration for who you are, for having disrespect for your ancestors, and for having disdain for the immense and abundant heritage that they've left behind, basically because you are completely oblivious and ignorant about your heritage. Because this education system or this training system is being designed to ensure that we continue to be dumbed down as far as the great heritage of our people. And it's a psychological warfare to deteriorate and to destroy and distort one's element of identity, so that you have always a weak opponent in front of you. You have somebody who has a complex of inferiority. You have somebody who's not sure that they are capable of doing things for themselves. You have people who cannot organize themselves. Not sure that they are capable of doing things for themselves. I have an echo. You have somebody who cannot organize. Thank you. So it's a process, because you cannot dispossess people who are sound and very well structured and organized from their possession. You cannot do that. It's impossible, because they will fight and they will organize to constantly, recuperate their rights to what they belong to them. But when you can destructure these people, then they can then act to facilitate the continuation of the abuse in so many different forms that we still see today. So education for me is, once we have the tools to start doing research and go to seek the information that our elders, our sages, and our own intelligentsia have produced, to debunk a lot of the lies and a lot of the misinformation that has been done for centuries to keep the African people subjugated and in a framework where they think they are inferior and they cannot overcome the challenges. So what they've done to us is basically the same technique as we do to tame an elephant. When an elephant is weak, small and weak, so we have been small and weak because we've been crippled with extreme brutality and violence. When the colonizer came into our lands, they brutalized, they used extreme force, catastrophic failure happened in a lot of our societies. So we were extremely weakened. They took massive amount of our own population, all the elements that structured a society and an economy were snatched. Many were killed. So the chain of transmission of information and the chain of transmission of teaching and know-how was completely interrupted. So we weakened our societies and we weakened our people because they were now in a survival mode and fear mode, where they feared that they would be next on that chain to embark on a boat to take them to nowhere. So once we were weakened, they basically did the same technique as you do with the elephant. When an elephant is small and weak, you put a chain on his neck, you attach the chain to a pole, and that chain is too strong for him when he's an infant. But once the elephant grows up, so during all the infancy and the time of weakness, the elephant will try to snatch the chain or snatch his neck away from the chain, but he will not be able to do that. So after so many trials of doing that, he will integrate in his brain that that chain is unbreakable and that bond is unbreakable. And therefore, even when he grows up and become a strong elephant, an elephant that is capable of freeing himself with just one movement, the elephant will no longer try because he will think still in his mind that he cannot free himself, that chain is way too big for him. So that is the mental chain that we still have around our necks and our brains. And we need to work very hard in making sure we connect with our educators, and we work as educators as soon as we know an information concerning our history, concerning the struggle we put forward, concerning the fight we put forward to preserve our liberty and the initiative on our own history, we have to become educators. So it's not just the savant and the professors and those who did books and research that have to be the one at the forefront of education, but everyone who has an element to restore the truth about the African experience has the obligation and the obligation and the how can I say it, the moral engagement to become an educator to the next person. And when I talk about education, I'm not just talking about educating the African looking people. I'm really talking about the education as a whole, because talking about our history is important to restructure ourselves, to understand what we have accomplished, what was our contribution to the world history and world civilization, to claim that we are capable, to understand that we are descendant of people who have left behind their genes, left behind the templates for success, left behind the values to have sound, balance, and moral societies, to promote values of solidarity, values of community, to work to control individualism and ego in society, because that leads to greed and therefore the excess use of violence to subjugate others, because benefit of self is greater than benefit of the community. So that work is, I believe, to be one of the most important work we have to do. So talking about how all that we contributed to do. When we talk about mathematics, for instance, I'm just giving a few examples. Mathematics in Congo, we were doing mathematics in Ishango 25,000 years ago. How come I am a doctor, I have a PhD, I have a doctorate, I have a bachelor degree, I have a master's degree, and I never learned anything like that in any school I went to, including schools in Africa. I've done a lot of math classes, all the way to almost engineering math in university. But I never heard once that mathematics come from Africa. All I heard was it's the Arabs, the Greeks, and all of that, but never the African, when indeed all these people came to Africa to get this information and use it to the benefit. So something is wrong. Something is wrong when you're not telling me that I'm using computers and I'm using all this technology of information technology, that I'm not giving credit to the fact that the binary code system comes from Africa. And it didn't come from Africa yesterday. It came from Africa hundreds of years ago. And an Arab merchant, probably one who was, capturing people and trying to grab people to sell in his land, came across, the way we encoded information in a binary and then brought it, and it ended up in Europe in, I believe, the 17th or 18th century. So we have to understand our contribution as people. Another contribution in social aspect, the first recorded human right charter is not from France. France qualified itself as being the country of human rights because they have La Charte des Droits de l'Homme. But how come in the 13th century we have the Charter of Human Rights of the Mandingo? What the Mandingo, the Mandé Charter of Human Rights, and basically every single article of that charter are the same as the one in the Charter of Human Rights. So education is about recovering our memory. Education is about restoring that memory so that we can restructure our way of thinking, so that we can alter the way we act to adopt behavior that are adaptive behavior, meaning behavior that serve to edify our lives, rather than maladaptive behavior that are those that do not edify our life. So for me, my role as a traditional leader is really to be an ambassador of that culture, to be a potent voice, to teach our people and to teach the world so that they can also start restructuring the way they look at us, and look at us not with the same measurement that they have been measuring us for now way too long, over a couple of centuries now. So that is really going to be my first work. Obviously, this work has led me to meeting a lot of people all over the world, because I don't believe the only one who needs educations are the African recent descendant, who are oftentimes very melanated, like yourself, my son, and me, maybe less. But of course, Africa has all the colors, we know that, and can birth every color on the planet, we also know that. But everyone has to be educated, not just the Africans, because if we are educated and we know all that, and the other ones are not, and still continue to have the same stereotype, what difference is gonna be in the rapport with each other? So of course, the responsibility lies on us to educate ourselves first. But that doesn't take away the fact that we also have to make sure that everybody knows that we know who we are. Because what has been our fault is that most of the time, other people know who we are, except that we don't know. So we have to push forward so we can restructure our education system or our training system so that they can include education elements about the identity of who we are, and of course incorporate all the great achievement of all those who have been deported from Africa, because they were deported in the worst condition ever. They were abused, they were killed, they were beaten, they were raped, men and women and children. They were treated, as subhuman for centuries. So the trauma was a transgenerational trauma. They always knew they came from somewhere else, but that somewhere else, they told them it was a garbage place, or, like one of the very famous quote of a president of the United States was a shithole. So they taught them from the get-go that the place they came from was not worth it to even dream about returning. So despite all of that, they held on very strong. They continued to use their culture and their heritage in everything they did. They used all they knew to survive and to fight for their lives and to fight for the legacy that they would leave behind for the younger generation like now to be alive today. So all those achievements that they made, all these amazing, gifts that they give to the world, have to be acknowledged as heritage of Africa as well. We have to include all the creations of our children of the diaspora and claim them for the continent of Africa as they were crown and jewels on the crown of Africa. So that's why it's important for me to go all over the world to reconnect with these people and to tell them that we are building an access point, or we are building bridges so that we can recover the memory. If we do not recover the memory, we will be considered forever like an Alzheimer patient, somebody who can no longer function because you forgot who you were. You forgot who you came from. So for me as a queen, Kwetuka Kujimini, it's my language to say, never forget where you come from. So if they forced you to forget, which is understandable for the strategy that they had to use, we need to make the effort and we need to invest greatly in turning the tides and to make sure we are proud of who we are. We shine our best light, and we definitely use the heritage to build upon it, not throw it away so that our heritage can be wealth in the museums of those same people that told us that these statues and these artifacts were the work of Satan and the evil demons, but they have them in their museum. How come? And if you can, none of our villagers would be able to even afford to buy one piece, because I've seen statues that were considered demonic to be sold for millions and millions of dollars in Sotheby's on auction halls in the most prestigious places in the world. So that tells us something about our culture. That tells us the value of how we understood existence. And now, more than ever, we have to really start standing tall, because we're entering in an era where the people who led humanity, pretending that they were capable of giving guidance to humanity so we could reach peaks of wellness and peaks of wealth, we have now come to the realization that it wasn't true. Because instead of reaching well-being, wellness, health, and wealth, we reached places where we can now destroy our planet over 60,000 times. We're creating weapons that are extremely lethal for a great, could decimate entire species of the planet. We created industrial processes and economies that are causing extreme waste in terms of carbon emission, in terms of plastic, in terms of all kinds of toxic chemicals that are including nuclear waste that are now dumped all over the world, and especially in Africa. We have oceans filled with plastic, where now we have islands of plastic that are a huge threat to destroying the marine life and this amazing ecosystem that are our oceans. We are created an atmosphere that is so toxic that the temperature of the planet is rising, and 1.5 degree extra will kill us as a species. So we can no longer pretend that the model and the template the Western world has proposed to us for wealth, health, wellness has worked. To the contrary, now that we have the evaluation, now that we have the perspective to do an evaluation, we realize that it was actually one of the most stupid, proposition. Yes, indeed, we did have gains in some areas, and I'm not going to say the contrary. However, what are the gains if we are going to kill the very system that is sustaining our life? How absurd is that? So I believe that Africa has a great role to play in terms of being leading in the discourse about sustainability. And I really don't like the word sustainability. I prefer that we use the word restorative processes and restorative behaviors and restorative economy. Because before we can sustain anything, we have to restore what we have already greatly damaged. And I believe Africa and the wisdom of Africa and the wisdom of the indigenous people of the world, because I'm also the president or the chair of the World Indigenous Forum. So my work is not just on the continent of Africa with African descendants. I was just in Mexico yesterday. I spent a week in Mexico meeting with the indigenous people of Mexico and some of Bolivia, of Peru, of Ecuador, and to hold council, because that is the wisdom that's going to have to come to the forefront when we have to redesign and restructure our economy. So we cannot talk about sustaining anything unless we talk about restoring first. And we cannot trust the very same people who were at the core, or the not the people, but the ideologies, the economic and social ideologies that are at the base of the economic model and industrial models that we pursued for quite a few centuries now, to be the ones who are going to bring a solution, because they might be flawed in their perspective. They might be cultural blindness, because see, they come from a model where in their culture, nature is a thing. Nature is just a thing, and we can just go into nature and take as much as we want and use for our own use with our own prerogative, without ever questioning what are the long-term consequences on the ecosystem. They never in their cultures included nature to be a capital element to preserve while we were pursuing activities to sustain our own lives. And this is not the case with Africa. Africa and other indigenous communities around the world have always considered nature to be sacred. This is why everywhere in Africa, in every culture, you have what we call nature reverence. We do not consider nature to be God and to pray to nature, but we are reverent to nature because God is imbued in his creation. See, the model and the worldview of the Western world is that God is outside of its creation and placed us on top of his creation so that we can dispose of it as we wish. In the African worldview and indigenous worldview, God is within its creation, not outside. So we cannot dispose of God's creation in any way we want. We have to approach God's creation with respect and reverence, and we have to be frugal with the abundance that nature gives us so that we do not deplete nature and we do not damage nature. So I would find it to be very natural that we would be those at the center of this discourse about regenerescence or regeneration of nature, so that we can sustain every single life on the planet. So many of the excess of the Western model have indeed shown a lot of limits, including the limits concerning wealth. When they pillaged Africa, they plundered many other continents, Asia and America and the Americas. The pretense was that they were going to become the richest on the planet. And yes, indeed, the first sign might suppose they are, because they have a lot of material wealth. But that material wealth is not equally shared. So we're starting to see the cracks in the system within the Western countries themselves. If you look at what's happening in the US and if you look at what's happening in Europe, I can give you an example of the Gilets jaunes in France and a lot of the protests and a lot of the movements that are now, demanding that the working class and the middle class have access to some of this wealth. So meaning that after centuries of going to plunder other people, taking lands and people and resources, the goal of making these people's land or people's countries wealthier is not so, it is not so so well achieved after all. So yes, the wealth is put in hands of few, but not in hands of all. So that's already a big flaws in the system. So the other pretense was that everybody was going to be healthier. So now we see that it's also not the case. Although they have access to all the technologies and all the most advanced medical tools and knowledge, it doesn't take away that this is where you see most of the chronic disease, like cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure and diabetes, immune disease, chronic immune disease, as well as mental health disease. And this is really one of the biggest problems that now these so-called industrial countries are starting to face now, is the crisis in mental health that is causing people to be living with severe depression, to be medicated at all time, anxiety, stress that is causing deficiency in immunity, suicide in a rate that you cannot even imagine in all these industrialized countries, especially suicide of young people, young male. It is a catastrophe. So the health and the wellness that the model had the pretense of offering is at the end of the day not so sure. So why am I making this very harsh assessment? Is because the discourse for Africa is to pretend that Africa, that is underdeveloped, that is emerging, and using the term development for Africa, is for me a bit tricky and a bit nonsensical, because the word development itself actually only means one thing, means be like us, be like the West. So you're going to have all these highways and all these cars and all these consumer goods and all this, use of electricity. You're going to have abundance in your refrigerator of food but the problem is it's not yielding the benefit for humanity and the planet that this model was pretending to. So why would Africa follow the same model? We cannot afford to follow the same model. We have to come with an indigenous model, our own model of development that suits our needs in terms of basic needs, access to water, access to food, access to healthcare, access to education, access to safety, access to justice. But once those objectives are reached, we have to be very careful not to apply economic models that will end up also killing us the same way it's killing everyone else who is under that model and excelling at the model. So we will also have the same pollution, the same drive and greed for raw material to build all these cities and all these industry and all these things. We will have the same lifestyle that is extremely stressful because everything is going to be about debt, and because it's a model that's fueled by debt. So you cannot possibly have the cash money to work and pay for everything that you have in your house. So you have to buy everything on credit. And if you have to buy everything on credit, you have to pay the credit back. And the model pushes you to continue consuming more and more because it's never over. You always have to keep going. You have the iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We are what, 14 now? The same thing with your TV, the same thing with your car, the same thing with your clothes, the same thing with everything. So the model is pushing you to do these behaviors, to be so-called part of the evolved and developed world, and then dealing now with the consequences that this kind of behavior is causing on the planet. Destruction of the planet, extreme pollution, and also destruction of an environment that is promoting life, because people get sicker and sicker and they are more stressed because all they do is work so they can pay those bills and those credit card bills. So we have to be very, very conscious about the model we're going to choose. And I don't believe the model exists yet. So I'm not criticizing the model just to criticize it. What I'm saying is that we have to build a better one. And not just for the African, for everyone. But you cannot build a better model without having the Africans. because the Africans bring another perspective, especially if they are grounded and they are respectful of their identity and their culture, and they stand on top of the heritage of the ancestors in terms of what is sound economy, not just what is profitable economy. Because when you measure the health of your economy only based on the number of your consumption, your production and consumption, including consumption and production of medicine for sick people, then you have to ask yourself if this model is relevant and how far this model will bring us. So in my work, I speak about Africa, but I use also Africa to create a space for these very difficult conversation. And without having to, I'm not here to blame anyone. I'm not here to slice anyone. But those are questions that we need to be honest and ask each other. And not just in Africa, but everywhere in the world. So wherever I go, I speak with this voice. And it's the voice, that of wisdom that I respect from my elders, those people who have not been to those fancy universities, but have been to the University of Life, have grown within nature, has been living, with what they need, but not all what they want, because we are not in a need economy, we are in a want economy. And so when they talk about Africa and African development, I see very little talk or little effort about having Africa in the need economy, meaning capable of sustaining itself with its own production of food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and education, and safety. But it's all about how can we see how we can catapult Africa to the want economy. But the cost of the want economy is enormous. And if we weigh on the balance of the want economy the same as everybody else is weighing, we're going to drag this planet to the complete brink of collapse. So going to the world and speaking to different leaders is to help leaders become more conscious of, what is going on, to ask leaders to become more connected with the ground level, because unfortunately, sometimes when you become a leader, you become almost like a superstar, and then they put you on the category of the elites, and then you may lose the connection with the people on the ground. And this is a role that traditional leaders cannot afford to do. We have to stay connected to the ground, because the ground is the sacred ground of our ancestors. And we have to stay connected with the people, because I am, because you are, Ubuntu. If I am a queen today, or woman king, is because the people are kings themselves. So I cannot be a queen if my people are not kings and treated as kings. I am only a king because they are Ubuntu. So to invoke those principles, to invoke this wisdom, to go around the world and to meet leaders and all the human family with great respect, because I am also a psychologist. So I understand that we made the choices in the past because we thought they were sound choices. We didn't make the choice because we knew they were bad choices that would lead to bad consequences. Most people don't function like this. Most people are decent people. Most, I'm not saying all, but most people are decent. So they make the choices that seem to them to be the best choice at the time because of the information that they have. But now that we have more information, now that we have further perspective, we have to start making different choices. But I do trust that these choices need to be informed with the voices that for too long have been silenced, and for those who have too long been outside of the door waiting for these big international institutions to make decisions for them that they thought were good for them, but without ever having a say in the solutions, and just be requested to implement them. We can no longer do that. In the Conference of Berlin in 1885, when the European powers made decisions, none of our great-grandfathers and great-mothers, kings and queens of Africa, were around the table. None. They made these decisions to create these countries on arbitrary and greed, based on their greed, also based on a pursuit for division, to ensure the weakness of Africa. But today, it is our turn. And they are no longer the same people. I mean, now it's their great-great-great-grandchildren. So we have to invite these people to understand that they have a vested interest in seeing Africa doing well. And I would probably conclude with this. The Congo Basin, I was recently in a meeting with the Met Office. The Met Office is an official body of the British government that is specialized in climate observation and study and environmental studies as well. They are the most sophisticated climate and climate and environmental research institution that is a body of the UK government. And for a long time, because I'm considered as an environmental activist, and I am, because I'm fighting against the use of plastic in Africa and in the world, but also I'm fighting to promote and to find solution for waste management in a lot of the African capital or big cities, as it is a huge problem in the Congo. So I'm fighting, and I have a very interesting project called the Great Congo River Project, and it's about eliminating the plastic from the waterways of the Congo Basin, because the Congo Basin represents the third freshwater reserve in the world. We have Brazil, we have Russia, and we have Congo. So most likely the children and the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the future will be drinking water that comes from the Congo Basin. But if we pollute the water, if we destroy this ecosystem that also sustains the primary forest of the world, the Congo forest, that the equatorial forest is the primary forest of the world, not the Amazon, the Congo equatorial forest, then what are we going to leave behind? So what I found out at the Met Office is that after a lot of studies, they have come to the conclusion that the Congo Basin, with its biodiversity, including the waterways and the forest, are by far the most resilient system that exists on the planet. Meaning that the Congo Basin could well be the place or the structure, the ecological, biological structure that can save the entire planet. So if we are smart, anyone should feel concerned about what's going on in the Basin of Congo, not just the Congolese. Because the wealth that we have in terms of the biodiversity and those two major systems to protect life on the planet needs to be well taken care of. So I cannot just talk to the people in the Congo, because the problem doesn't just come from the people in the Congo. When I grew up in Congo, we didn't have plastic bottles. When you needed to drink water, you would go to ask a neighbor, to ask anybody who lived on your way, knock on any door, and people will sit you down and give you a glass of water for free. And sometimes you may even have a fruit and peanuts. And then you would go off your way, and you never had to come back there, or you never have to see these people again. So when we were, playing and, around, we used to just drink water wherever we were from the faucet. But our infrastructures have decayed tremendously. And then they proposed to us to give us clean water in plastic bottle. So now this is development, isn't it? But look at the cost. So we are poisoning our land. We are poisoning our people. We are dumping tons of plastic in the oceans. We are killing marine life because of so-called development. So solution that we bring to Africa for the so-called development have to be thoroughly analyzed to see all the repercussions of those so-called solutions, to see if down the line we will be able to deal with the problem that they will bring next. And so it requires great efforts and great wisdom from our leaders to see through that we do no longer accept just anything, just for the sake of so-called development, but we are very, very, very strict about applying some of the solution that has been imposed upon us. Also, I encourage all the leaders to go to the local population, to go to the people on the ground, to go to the indigenous people, to go to those people who did not graduate from any fancy university, but rather from the University of Life. Because these people are the most resilient, the most brilliant, the most creative, and the strongest and the most courageous people. Because every day they are faced with extreme adversity. And every day they rise and they go at it and they give their best to make sure that they pass on life and they sustain their life. And it's not easy. When I go to Africa and I see the strength of the mothers, the strength of these women carrying heavy loads, and a baby and a small child holding a small child by the hand to go to the marketplace at 5 o'clock in the morning and work in the worst condition and the worst heat, and yet all of that so she can feed her children and put them to school. You cannot tell me that this lady is not the one you need to ask questions to if you really want to find solution to problems, because I bet you this lady knows how to find solutions. So I really am advocating for the inclusion of the community in the decision-making processes, on the design of solution, not to leave out anyone of the process, because in our tradition, see, we did not have the so-called democracy, but everyone had a voice. And the one who won was not the strongest one or the most numerous one. The one who won was the one who was the wisest and that could propose solutions that were going to be agglomerating the community rather than separating the community. So, and the community is not just of humans, the community is also with nature. So I think we have to revise and restructure our way of dealing with the reality. And so my job is basically to go around and do that and to invite anyone in the world, anyone, I don't care your color, your religion, I don't care your sex, your whatever, but so long as you have a good disposition and you have kind and respectful ways, so that you can participate in a dialogue and bring all the asset that you have in terms of intelligence, in terms of wisdom, in terms of wealth, in terms of technology or technology or information technology around the table, but to serve that particular purpose that is much different than just making the money. So this is a core, the things that I do. And recently I participated in an amazing process. That's the documentary on Queen Zinga, one of the amazing queens of Africa, a woman king as well, because she sat on the throne of her father. And she fought against the Portuguese, against the Dutch, against the church. She fought and she negotiated her way to keep her legacy alive, to make sure that her people were safe and free, and tell the story. Because oftentimes in the Western world, when people who are African descendant, they also told them a story that, oh, your own family sold you. So that's to continue to divide the people and to not contextualize something, a statement so abrasive is really abuse. Because to say to you that, oh no, your own people sold you, but not to put into context that before the need for people who are enslaved, before the need for free labor, there was no such practice anywhere on the continent of Africa. Matter of fact, the word for slavery did not exist in our ancient languages. So to not contextualize it and say that after brutal attacks, after destructuration of our defense system, of our political system, of our economic system, once we were collapsed, that some people got into those trades as a means of survival, it's a different thing than to say that your family sold you. So I think that the documentary will contextualize a bit of this process, of what we went through, and that it wasn't a voluntary and then European boats were just passing through the coast of Africa and realized that we had markets where they were selling people. Families were just selling their people, and they said, "Oh, what are you doing there with the people?" "Oh, well, we're selling our families." And then went on and say, "Well, you know what? We will buy a couple of them." That's not how it happened. But that's the discourse to continue to divide each other. Before we got there were centuries of extreme fighting, extreme resistance, where many of our kings were killed in combat. Many of our warriors that were not really prepared for this kind of violence, this level of technology mastery of the art of war. They were not prepared for that. We never had to face anything like that since the beginning of time. So I believe that the type of documentary that is the African Queens in Netflix is quite important, because it's not just talking about our history in a way where scholars have done it over and over, and you can find a lot of lectures online on YouTube with amazing scholars that are talking about the history of Africa. And I invite you to search such great scholars of African intelligentsia to learn more. However, in this documentary, the way they did it, they put a documentary mixed with a drama that makes it more interesting for people, for the lay people, because everybody does not want to go to watch a lecture of a professor that is like a master level or doctorate level lecture, but to vulgarize the information so everyone can have access to some information, at least to lay the ground of an understanding that Africa was a flourishing continent with amazing cultures that were demonized for no reason, because the Pope just gave an order that the Europeans could just seize any land, and for that they were to treat the so-called infidel with the most disdain and violence. So that documentary allows us to have a small peek at one particular time period, but so much of our own history is not written by us. So much of our history is written by those who have come to plunder and colonize. So we have to be very measured into the way we understand the history that was told to us. And we need to now debunk and work really hard to debunk a lot of the misconceptions and the lies and the misinformation. So this is, I believe, can wrap up a bit, unless you have one question. I think your sound is fixed now. But this is, in a nutshell, some of the things that I do. Of course, I am also involved into several projects on the land, on the continent. They are development projects, really based on those elements that I just shared. First, we have to know, how is that project going to benefit the people, not just the investors, and what will be the consequences on natural resources and further consequences to our environment. So all of these, I call them the stakeholders, have to be those who gain the most of these investments. But of course, since we are still in a capitalist ideology of economy, then people who invest oftentimes want to have money in return, which is fair. However, it has to be done in a certain way. So I work in a project of clean energy projects and housing projects, infrastructure projects, mobility projects, health projects, and education projects, and also fashion. I work with designers from Congo to promote Congo fashion, basically because we need to also redefine what is formal to us, what is correct way to dress to us. We can no longer accept that only the standard of some culture impose what is acceptable. So I see a young man today wearing, the colors of your tribe and proudly exhibiting, your necklaces, and those I know are of great significance and shows not only your status, but the way you are appreciated in your community, your rank, and also the value they place in you, the trust that they place in you to give you these things, and the responsibility you do hold in your scepter, because it's always a reminder that you are responsible. So we need to redefine what is the identity of an African person today. We need to choose the things that fits our cultural, makeup and our needs. And we need to heal, because I'm not talking a lot about the healing portion. However, healing is extremely important, because so long as we measure ourselves with the standards that have been imposed upon us, that we will never reach, no matter how much we bleach our skin, no matter how much we relax our hair, no matter how well we speak the language of the Western languages, no matter how many diplomas we have from the fancy universities, no matter how much we wear ties and brand names from Italy or France or London, no matter how, we will always remain African. So if we do all of this to run away from our Africanness, then it's a failed enterprise, and it's only going to yield more mental neurosis. So redefining and working together to, of course, say, yeah, we are contemporary African. I don't encourage anybody to wear the same clothes as our great grandparents were wearing, because that doesn't make sense. Even they were not wearing the same clothes as their own great grandparents. So yes, we live with our times. We have to integrate information, the technology. We have to integrate and change some of the things we've done. Maybe some of the customs that we've done were appropriate then, but no longer appropriate now. So we have a right to challenge even our traditions and in our own culture. But we have to choose in our own terms, and no longer accept the imposition of somebody else. And this is not to say that we have to reject everything that comes to us, because this is the nature of humanity. Humanity have always mixed. The reason Europeans are in Europe and Asians are in Asia and Arabs are in Arab, the reason why all these people are all over the world is because they left Africa one day. Everybody came from Africa. The humanity, for the last information we have on the genome, the human genome, we know that we are about 400,000 years of a modern Homo sapiens sapien, roughly 400,000. But out of that 400,000 years, we lived only on the continent of Africa for 330,000 years. We only started to leave Africa 70,000 years ago. And then we populated the entire planet. And if we change our colors, skin color change, the skin color change is roughly 10,000 years, if not less. The gene mutation has been identified by Chinese scientists. When did the gene start to mutate? And that was for the preservation of life, because the Caucasian was stuck in the Caucasian plain, in a place where when the last glacial era came, they were freezing, literally freezing. They had no sun. They were in cold temperatures. They could not metabolize vitamin D with the dark skin. So natural nature took her process and helped her children survive. But everywhere else where the climate was temperate, people were dark skinned, including Europe. The first Europeans are not white skinned. The white skinned people come to Europe 10,000 years, not earlier. So when we see cavemans and all that in Europe, when now we're starting to analyze the DNA of the remains of these people, you can look at the Grimaldi, the man of Grimaldi. You can look at the Cheddar Man. They are the most ancient Homo sapiens sapien skeleton they find in Europe. And every single skeleton they find in Europe that's predate 10,000 years, the DNA is of a dark-skinned human being. So the story is to be told so that this stupid division among each other, just based on the color of our skin and the way we speak and the languages, all of this have to recede. I'm not saying it has to disappear, because the diversity is a beautiful thing. It's like a bouquet of diverse flowers. It's really pretty. Or a painting of a master is usually full of different colors. And that's God's work, to do us differently, because God is a creator. God is the biggest artist we can imagine. However, these differences cannot, entertain our destruction. So for me to go in the world and talk about our own healing as African people, so we can own those gifts of our diversity, of our differences, because those are gifts. Those represent wealth, so that we can also combine our wealth with the wealth of everybody else. So that once we unite, then we can consider we have strength. So I think I will leave you with those words, because I've been on the show for 1 hour and 10 minutes, and it's pretty late here in Los Angeles. I will hear your voice again. I know we had a little bit of a technical issue, so I had to do lecture mode rather than question and answer, but I hope that I've answered most of your questions. And if I didn't, may it be just what the ancestor wanted me to share today. So maybe another time, if you have answers, questions that I haven't addressed properly, we can reconvene for another conversation where we will not have this technical issue of your microphone not working for way too long. But I thank you for this opportunity, and I'm going to let you speak, because now I know you fixed the issue. If you have anything that you want to say or want to add, please do.
Indeed, my queen, mine is just to give gratitude, because as you said, we followed the wishes of the ancestors. Instead of having a back and forth, the ancestors chose you as queen of the Bakwa Luntu, the grandma of the people of Brazil, and the people of Panama and Africa at large, to hear to you, to listen to you. And in fact, what you have covered was divinely guided by the ancestors. And I am in gratitude, because instead of a bunch of questions that would have made us seem like robots, you hit it on the head. You brought it exactly as it was meant to be. Because not just as a spiritual leader, but also as a king in waiting to my people. And you as a queen do understand that we do not work of our own volition. When the elders bestow the totems and the diadems of our people, we not just represent ourselves, but we have millions and millions of our ancestors behind us, and we are just vessels for these ancestors. So perhaps one question before we release you, my queen. You went to the Great Pyramids, and you've had the privilege to perform one of the ancient rituals, which are secret to those of us in these orders, but perhaps the experience for our people, because at this moment they are practicing a spirituality that is not of our people. Perhaps just to brush on it, my queen.
Ashe. So I think I mentioned something quite interesting about, the heritage that we have been asked to throw away. Everybody else picked it and to do whatever they needed to do with it. So all I'm doing is basically encouraging us to go back and reclaim what is rightfully from our experience, and not to deprive others from the heritage, because again, this is how cultures develop. It's an exchange, and it's dynamic. But I went to the Cheops, or the Khufu pyramid, actually it's called Khufu because the ancestor Khufu, and Khepra, and many other sacred grounds. But I went inside the Great Pyramid of ancestor Khufu, and I went to the source of the pyramid, because we know that there is a source to the pyramid, where I did indeed pray for inspiration, for strength, for guidance. I gave also reverence to make sure that they know that we have not forgotten them, and that we have not forsaken them, and that we need constant guidance and wisdom, because we need to operate from the depth of our consciousness. And in our tradition, an ancestor is not a phantom. See, we don't have spooky, weird, superstitious stuff. This is some false image that Hollywood and company has done to continue to perpetuate the myth of the evil, African and barbarian and savage and evil worshiper and demon. So those are propaganda, and now we know that. Ancestors are within us. We are made of the life of all the human beings that came before us. If I give only a reference of 400 years, for 400 years, so I can be here. If I go back up 400 years, I have over 4,000 people that have contributed to my life, to making me who I am. If you count your parents, 2, your grandparents, 4, and you keep going. So 400 years, about 4,000 something people. That's just 400 years. So now if you imagine we've been around for 400,000 years, how many human beings contributed to you being alive? And now we're not only talking about the ancestors who are your bloodline. That's one thing. But what about all the ancestors and all the people that were teachers? All the people that protected the life of your ancestors? All the people that fed your ancestors? All the people that taught your ancestor wisdom, respect, the laws of order? All these are also ancestors that are part of our DNA, because our DNA does not only contain biological information. Our DNA is a bank that contains experiential information. So we are the ancestors manifested. So we need to connect with that and to open the portal that allows us to go within. So all these civilizations that came after and plunder a lot of the wealth in knowledge and in wisdom of Africa have copied a lot of our texts. Our ancestors left all these texts, and although they burned the libraries of Alexandria and others that they not mention in history, but many libraries in Kemet were burned. But our ancestors were smarter than that, because they wrote everything on walls. And before they could read what was on walls, the same people that actually subjugated us, Napoleon, brought an expedition in Kemet where Champollion was able to translate and decode the Kemetic Medu Necher. So once we started to read the Medu Necher, so you could tell all the lies you wanted before, because you didn't have a point of reference. You thought whatever lies were novel. So many so-called holy documents were written based on stories that they picked up from Kemet. But since they did not, we try to cut the umbilical cord between the production of the new so-called revealed religion with the ancient science that were not religion but were science. Eventually it becomes a problem, because now we know what is written on the walls of Kemet, and we have been able to put all these texts now to analyze. And now we are realizing that every single major religious system, including Buddhism, including Shintoism, including Tao, including Judaism, including Christianity, including Islam, including all of these expressions, are only expressions that are roughly touching the surface of the legacy of Kemet. So there's nothing wrong with that, in the sense that if you know that you have copied from some source, it's even in academic world, you have to cite your source. And for too long, we have not cited the sources of where did you get these prayers? Where did you get these beautiful psalms? Where did you get them? How come you're getting them 2, 3, 4,000 years before you existed? They already existed. So you cannot tell me you invented a text or a prayer in 100 or 0 before Common Era, but that text, you find it on a stele in Kemet 2,000 years before. You cannot pretend anymore. So the call here is not to bash on these, natural development. But the truth has to come to the surface, not to destroy anybody, but to elevate everyone. So when I read the prayers of Kemet, when I learned because I've been there several times, the immense advancement of the spiritual thought, I am baffled by the beauty and the grace. And when I read the 42 negative confessions, see, our brothers, the Hebrews, took 10 of them, because all of them that they have existed prior to the episode that they describe as being a revelation. But out of the 42 that we had, they only took 10. But we have to read the other 32. They include as sin the mere fact of raising your voice to cause somebody to have distress and sadness. That is also included in the 42 commandment. To pollute a river is a sin for our ancestor. But see, all of these we disregarded for reason probably that made sense at the time for the people to get where they needed to be. But we have to be very cautious about adopting information without checking the source. So just as we're gonna ask for academic rigor to promote a scientific paper, to publish a research paper, we also ought to do the same when it comes to spirituality. Because a lot of people have used spirituality not to elevate people as they're supposed to, but rather to subjugate. And you can only do that when you are missing some of the laws that are in our ancient traditions. None of our laws would have allowed for slavery to exist because we didn't have it. It doesn't exist. The word doesn't even exist in our languages. None of our laws would have allowed for the destruction of the environment. None of our laws would have agreed and promoted the maltreatment of women and the abuse of children. Our laws were very clear on all of that. So we have what we have now, but if what we have now can be informed of the actual source of the information, I think we would have another attitude towards the heritage, and we might complete the descendant today. Everyone today might have a more holistic view and have a more complete view of what were the achievement of our ancestors in terms of spirituality, because everyone came to Kemet to learn. Everyone. So this is what I would want to say. Respect your elders, respect women, respect children, respect nature. Give reverence to the Most High, because God is in everything. So treat everything as if it was God. And to whatever you feel it's a toxic, that it's going to deter and deteriorate your integrity, just step away. And that includes corruption. That includes devaluating habits and mores. That include a lot of different things that we see, unfortunately, in front of us in this current era. So a big question has to be made to restructure ourselves. But let's use our resilience and our strength and our intelligence and our wisdom to propose a model for ourselves, but also for the entire human family. Thank you.
Indeed, a true embodiment of Maitomombi. Most of you may know her as Mama Ndombe. Yes, the mother of Africa. You hear her speaking through her descendants, through her lineage. My queen, I wish not to keep you any more than you have. On behalf of the 9 clans and the kingdom of Kenda Moyoru, it is gratitude on behalf of the Bantu Re-Education TV community. Much gratitude to the east. You are familiar with those of us who dwell on the mountain, the guardians in the east. And we are and we support your mission. Everywhere you are, know that our prayers are with you, our hearts are with you, and our spiritual, it is humbling to see that our monarchs are showing and leading by example. Because if we were hosting a political leader and we had that sound technicality, I would have gotten a serious reprimand from their media. But you are patient with us, and the message that required to be delivered was delivered. Let those, because we have been restored to the ways you see the Queen herself. And as she said, look out for that series that is going to come up on Netflix. The true history
It is
of our
already
people.
on Netflix.
Do not be fooled anymore. So, my Queen, it is already on Netflix. I stand corrected and guided. So, my Queen, Bayete.
Bayete, and I hope to come to see you soon. As soon as I receive an invitation, I will rush my steps to come to visit my family there in the east of the continent with great joy, and hope to learn from you, hope to learn from the elders, and pay my respect to the community, to the kingdom. Thank you for inviting me. Ashe, Ashe, Otep.
So, my Queen, at your leisure.
Like an anthem falls from the hands of a great Buddha, may your dance to play. The rise in the land of the living, WPB, BANTU production.
Mtoto wa Kibatu, Mana Muntu. Mana Muntu.